The raid on St. Augustine was a military event during the Anglo-Spanish War in which the Spanish settlement of St. Augustine was captured in a small fight and burnt by an English expedition fleet led by Francis Drake. This was part of Francis Drake's Great Expedition and was the last engagement on the Spanish Main before Drake headed north for the Roanoke Colony. The expedition also forced the Spanish to abandon any settlements and forts in present-day South Carolina. Background: war had already been unofficially declared by Philip II of Spain after the Treaty of Nonsuch, in which Elizabeth I had offered her support to the rebellious Protestant Dutch rebels. The Queen, through Francis Walsingham, ordered Sir Francis Drake to lead an expedition to attack the Spanish New World in a kind of preemptive strike. Sailing from Plymouth, England, he struck first at Santiago in November 1585, then across the Atlantic at the Spanish New World city of Santo Domingo, of which was captured and ransomed on the 1st of January 1586, and following that successfully attacked the important city of Cartagena on the 19th of February. Drake wanted to strike at another Spanish city on the Main before finally visiting and replenishing Sir Walter Raleigh's new colony of Roanoke Colony on the American East Coast. Then, after this, he hoped to make the transatlantic crossing back to England. The fleet headed north, and in late April Drake put into the Spanish-Cuban mainland, and his men dug wells in search of fresh water and gathered supplies to help counter an outbreak of dysentery, after which he moved on. The fleet traveled north within sight of land on the Florida Peninsula, sailing past the west coast. On the 27th of May 1586, as they approached further north, a small fort was spotted on the shore, with a small inlet close by. This was the location of St. Augustine, the most northerly town in Spain's New World Empire, and the oldest permanent colonial settlement in North America. Drake knew of the place and was also aware of the fact that the Spanish under Pedro Menéndez de Avilés had ordered all of the French Huguenot colonists that had tried to settle in the area executed. Drake decided on one final opportunity to raid and plunder, and a chance to avenge his fellow Protestants' capture. The English attacked and bombarded a small wooden fort in the sand dunes. The Spanish fired only a few shots and fled. Drake sent a landing party to investigate, while Carlyle and a few volunteers rowed a ship's boat into the inlet, and there was no sign of any Spaniards. It sat on a strip of sand, separated from the mainland by a band of water, which entered into the inlet. A French Huguenot, Nicolas Bourgoignon, who had been taken prisoner by the Spanish 6 years before, was found in a boat and agreed to guide the English to the Spanish settlement. The Spanish governor of St. Augustine, Pedro Menéndez de Marquez, was warned that Drake was off the coast, and he realized that with fewer than 100 militiamen he could offer little in the way of resistance. The Spanish settlers withdrew inland and hoped to make surprise raids against the English gradually. Drake and his men occupied the area of the small fort, but during the night Indians attacked, launched by native allies of the Spanish garrison. Drake and his men held the ground, and within 20 minutes the Indians were repulsed with some loss. The following day, Drake, Carlyle and around 200 men advanced up the inlet in pinnaces and small boats, and they soon came across the Spanish log stockade fort of San Juan. After a few shots by the Spanish, the English landed and took the fort with only a few losses. They found it deserted, as the Spanish had fled, but found intact a gun platform with 14 bronze artillery pieces. They also found a chest containing the garrison's pay, about 2,000 gold ducats, which was inadvertently left behind in the retreat. Drake, knowing the Spanish had fled, began to plunder what he could. He took the guns and burned the fort to the ground. Soon the English came upon the main settlement of St. Augustine itself. This time they found it deserted. The Spanish, however, were just beyond the settlement in the outskirts when Drake's men arrived, and they opened up a skirmishing fire. Anthony Powell, one of Carleill's deputies, was killed in the opening shots as he tried to assault the outskirts. Carleill's men then charged all the way to the outskirts of the town into the scrub, forcing the Spanish to retreat, leaving Drake in control of the settlement. The English garrisoned it overnight and the following day razed the whole of St. Augustine to the ground. All buildings were torched, crops were destroyed, and anything of value was either taken or destroyed. The fort of San Juan was burnt and all the artillery pieces were carried by the English, among other booty. Aftermath. Once the English had gone, Menendez and the rest of the Spanish settlers returned to find a smoldering ruins and very little left. He soon begged for help from the Viceroy of Cuba, and the settlement took a while to build itself back up. The destroyed fort was replaced with the present-day Castillo de San Marcos. Roanoke. Drake's fleet sailed from St. Augustine on the 29th of May, heading northwards up the coast looking for signs of Raleigh's settlement. They looked into what is now Charleston Harbor but found it deserted, then continued up the coast until they saw smoke. A boat was sent to investigate, and its crew finally made contact with the English settlers, who were encamped on the Roanoke Island. He had no supplies but offered to take any of the settlers back, and reached England on July 22, when he sailed into Portsmouth. When Drake arrived in England, he became a national hero. By the time news had also reached most of Europe to the fact that Drake had made the raid. In Spain the news was a disaster, and this now further buoyed a Spanish invasion of England by King Philip. Consequences. The consequences of Drake's raid were significant to the Spanish. Rumors soon began to spread that the English had a settlement further north and were using the place as a base for piracy. This was confirmed by news from released Spanish prisoners that Drake had wanted to replenish the colony of Roanoke. Although the Spanish knew of Roanoke, they could not find the English colony despite a number of military expeditions sent out. Menendez came the closest, reaching 37 degrees latitude, but failed to find anything. Fearing another raid, and with the Spanish settlements on the American west coast being overstretched, undermanned and underarmed, a crisis followed. Menendez even conferred with the Council of the Indies in Seville and Philip II, that all concentration should be in one place, and that being at St. Augustine, Menendez, despite objections, got his way, and as a result Paris Island and Santa Elena were abandoned. This marked the end of the permanent Spanish presence in what today is South Carolina. Legacy. In the present day, the events of Sir Francis Drake's raid are recreated in June at St. Augustine. So far there have been 27 reenactments, and all are held in the old part of town. The reenactment features an encampment, drills, weapon demonstrations, and more.